What was Pfizer got to hide? This is a question that we are all asking after we found out that the CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, pulled out. The interesting thing is, a few weeks ago, the CEO of Moderna, we were criticizing these pharma companies, for being or for lacking transparency. But at least the CEO of Moderna had the courage, I would say, to come and answer questions. Yeah, he did not answer all the questions that we asked, but at least he was present here and was faced with all these questions that all of my colleagues asked. So obviously, when we found out that the CEO of Pfizer decided not to come and answer questions, this is not an inquiry committee. So he was not bound by law to come, and he was not on record, he was not facing any criminal punishments in case he's lying in front of this committee. But even in that case, he refused to come and answer some concrete and specific questions. Questions that I think all of us and all of you have. And the first question is, what exactly in these contracts? What are they hiding exactly? I mean, in the previous press conferences, I showed you some of the pages, from these contracts. This is how they were disclosed to us, and to the public, and to the press. Obviously, after some of us and some of the brave journalists asked, what are the contracts signed between the European Commission and these pharmaceutical companies? So this is how they disclose the contracts. Over 100 pages. Every contract with Pfizer, with Moderna, tens of pages of those contracts were blacked out. So yesterday when we asked, I was the one asking, and some of my colleagues asked, when are they going to fully release these contracts? The representative of Pfizer, who was sent to replace the CEO of Pfizer, said that they can't fully disclose these contracts because they have some commercial secrets over there, and they have to protect their interests. Now I'm asking you, what about the interests of our people? What about the interests of the Europeans whose money was spent, or wasted, I would say now, to buy these medical products that are not providing what they were marketed for? Because what we found out yesterday, when one of my colleagues asked if they tested, in this case Pfizer, if Pfizer tested, if their medical product is stopping the spread of the virus, we were shocked to find out yesterday that they haven't tested their vaccine to see if it's stopping the spread of the virus. So we are now more than a year after the green certificate, the digital green certificate was imposed in the European Union, and people were forced to be vaccinated with the medical product in order to exercise their basic fundamental rights, and they were told, and we were told, we were voted against the green certificate, but many of our colleagues voted in favor of it because they believe what these companies have said, that if you get vaccinated, you will not be infected and you will not spread the virus. They even ran a campaign and said, get vaccinated in order to keep your grandmother and your parents healthy. And we find out now, after more than a year, that when they requested the special marketing authorization, they haven't tested the vaccine to see if it's stopping the spread of the virus. So I'm asking again, and we are asking again, what are they going to hide? What do they hide exactly? Why aren't they transparent with their medical product? We heard yesterday, I was shocked. Because Pfizer used this opportunity just to do a PR campaign and even lecture us, why are we asking this and not asking that? Who are they to question us? What kind of questions do we ask? We are elected by the people, for the people, not they. And they are supposed to answer all these questions, which they have not. There's another issue right now raised all across Europe. The excess mortality rate in the month of July 2020, according to Eurostat, In the month of July, the excess mortality rate all across European Union went up 16% more than the average of 2016 and 2019. Now, if you look on the map here, this is released by the Eurostat. It's not from us. If you look on this map, you will see that the countries with the highest vaccination rate have right now the highest mortality rate. So obviously we asked, is there a connection between being vaccinated and having a higher mortality rate? Everybody's avoiding answering this, I would say, logical question. There's another issue. A year ago, I requested Emma to submit some details and data to me because I wanted to have an informed decision, I would say, when I voted in favor or against the green certificate. And one of the questions that I asked Emma is to send me all the trials, the tests, the clinical trials that all these medical companies had done, either in animals or in humans, before they requested the marketing authorization. So in the case of Pfizer, here's something interesting. Comirnaty. When they submitted the information and the clinical trials to Pfizer, here's all the tests that they submitted along with the request. They submitted a clinical trial that started in January 14th, 2020. I asked yesterday the representative of Pfizer and she declined to answer. How is it possible that we, the world, found out in December of 2019 that there is a COVID, or coronavirus as it's called, in China, December of 2019. On January the 11th, the Chinese government released the DNA data, or a segment of it, to the public, and 3 days later, Pfizer already started the tests for this vaccine. How is that possible? She did not answer. In the case of Moderna, and I've asked the CEO of Moderna 2-3 weeks ago when he was here, they submitted trials since 2017. So I'm restating the question, how is it possible that when we found out in the fall of December, winter of 2019 about this virus, they submitted tests of their vaccines years before we found out about the virus. And I'm still asking that question now. How is that possible? So these are the legit questions that we all asked, and that people are asking us. And unfortunately, they are declining to answer. So these were the main topics, I would say, that we tried to clarify yesterday. And unfortunately, the Pfizer representative, as Moderna representative, declined to answer. We will keep pushing to clarify these facts, and nevertheless, to make sure that the European Commission is going to fully release the content of these contracts. Thank you.
You'll have noticed the term myocarditis and died suddenly has featured quite a lot. Now, we know that myocarditis and pericarditis are two heart inflammation conditions well associated with the COVID mRNA injections. Even the Therapeutic Goods Association admits that. Yet, despite this well-established fact, the injections were mandated to thousands of Australians, and speaking out about these incursions on freedom got one labelled an anti-vaxxer or a peddler of dangerous misinformation. Now, I've obtained data through Freedom of Information from SA Health in South Australia regarding the number of cardiac presentations per month in South Australian public hospitals since 2018. The data reveals that cardiac-related presentations for 15 to 44-year-olds remain steady at 1,100 per month from January 2018, but drastically spiked in July 2021 through November 2021, peaking at 2,172 per month just as these injections were rolled out. They almost doubled. Then there was another spike in February of this year, right around the time when the boosters were being mandated. These injections are harming and in many instances killing our young people. So what does SA Health have to say about this? Nothing. They continue to roll out the injections. They continue to push the injection narrative. This injection campaign is going to go down as the greatest scandal in medical history, and none of you said a single thing.
Continued the Morrison government's campaign to sign away Australian sovereignty to the United Nations World Health Organization, the WHO. Despite the attempt failing, WHO's power grab is ongoing. WHO is not independent. Their owners are corporate donors who contribute most of the WHO budget. WHO's current sugar daddy is Bill Gates, who has made billions out of his investment in the same vaccines that WHO promotes. Gates bought the WHO and they now recommend his products. It is that simple. The head of the WHO is Tedros Ghebreyesus, previously health minister of a terrorist organisation called the Tigray People's Liberation Front, where he used international aid to buy power and punish his enemies. The regions of Ethiopia that Tedros starved for medical supplies suffered disastrous cholera epidemics in 2006, 2009, 2011. Independent investigators found Tedros was, quote, fully complicit in the terrible suffering and dying that spread in East Africa. He's a killer. WHO is rotting from the head. Last week, Associated Press reported on the WHO sex crime scandal, where WHO staffers sexually exploited girls and women during the Congo's recent Ebola outbreak. Inhuman. At least 83 WHO staff engaged in abuse, including rape and forced abortions, with victims as young as 13. WHO refused to fire the perpetrators, using the absurd argument their actions didn't violate WHO's sexual exploitation policies because the victims were not receiving WHO aid. The raping part is okay with Tedros. This is the person who heads an organisation that many in government and academia want to elevate above the Australian Parliament. One Nation rejects the UN WHO power grab and will defend Australian sovereignty. So should you all.
Thank you, Senator Ross.
It's become clear that people in this country and globally have been steamrolled. It is also clear that it has been coordinated globally. It is also clear that it has been integrated, not just over 6 months, not just over 2.5 years, but it has been planned over decades. The changes to legislation in this country were done so that they could control doctors and people. But the people are waking. We know and we knew that this is all bullshit and that we've been had. But we are going to hound you down, the people that are guilty. We are going to hound you down and hold you accountable, and we will expose your global agenda so that the people of Australia can be free in the future. Because I love my kids and I'm looking forward to my grandkids. And we are going to save this country.
The first set of questions is for both AstraZeneca and Moderna. So the first question is, I would like to know the date, if it's possible, when you decoded the full DNA sequence of this virus, or you solely relied on the sequence provided to you by the Chinese government. Second question, have you tested if the vaccines are stopping the spread of the virus or not? Because the data clearly shows that your products are not stopping the spread of this virus. Third question, have you had people who died during human trials? And if so, what were the illnesses that they died from? Now, I have certain questions for Moderna, for Mr. Bouncel. You stated here that you relied on the sequence provided to you by the Chinese government when you developed your vaccine. I have here an answer from Emma, which is showing for every vaccine the kind of tests that were done. So in the case of Moderna, for example, you provided data showing that you tested these vaccines since 2017, 2018, 2019. So how were you able to test these vaccines back then when we found out about this virus in December of 2019? Second question, the contracts. You mentioned here that there are some secrets or some confidential information in these contracts that should protect your interests. Now the question that I address to you, what about the interests of us and the interests of the European citizens? Because this is how some of the pages from the contract between Moderna and the European Commission is showing. So I'm asking you, do you think this is fair to all of us? To talk about these vaccines, to talk about boosters, to talk about medical products, when we don't know the clauses of these contracts. So the direct question to you, Mr. Boncel, is when are you going to fully publish the contracts that you had both with the European Commission and with the member states of the European Union? Another question, the issue of liabilities. You were asked by our colleague here about the liabilities and you avoided to answer this question. So my question to you is, why are you pushing the liabilities on the states and on the people who receive these vaccines and might have, and I say might have, adverse effects while you get all the profits? Nevertheless, the bivalent boosters, this is the last question.
Yeah, but
you just stated here that these boosters were requested by the US government, who also approved the boosters without trials on humans. So I'm asking you, do you think this is fair? Do you think we can go and ask the European citizens to be vaccinated with some medical products that were not properly tested or not at all tested in humans? Thank you.
Back in 2021, we had the revelation of emails from the German Interior Ministry that enlisted scientists to scare the population. Last year, it was revealed that the corona figures had been falsified by Dutch Health Minister Hugo de Jonge by inflating the numbers. And now we have the revelation of over 100,000 WhatsApp messages from former British Health Minister Matt Hancock. The British Daily, The Telegraph, has put them online as the lockdown files. From all these revelations, it has been shown time and again that the coronavirus was no more deadly than other cold and flu viruses. As we know from flu and colds, these can be fatal to vulnerable, very old people. But for anyone under 80, these viruses are almost never fatal. And so it was with COVID-19. It was a common cold virus. Minister Matt Hancock had a discussion with then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, via WhatsApp about this low mortality rate. This was a problem because it meant vaccination targets would not be met. The lockdown files also show that in addition to the vaccines, other corona measures were mainly intended to instill fear of the virus in the population. The revelations in Germany, the Netherlands and now especially in the United Kingdom show that the same corona policy was deliberately followed in all these countries, which had nothing to do with the nature of the coronavirus itself. The lockdown files show that no special measures were needed given the low mortality of the virus. The British government switched from publishing mortality rates to publishing the number of infections. The entire EU then switched and reported on corona in the same way. Pushing through the vaccines and introducing the corresponding digital corona certificate was the real goal. For this, no means were shunned. Unvaccinated people were not simply portrayed as irresponsible, but as antisocial, dangerous enemies of the state. There were threats of incarceration and forced vaccination. Unvaccinated people were fired. People were locked in their homes via curfews. Hospitals and nursing homes prohibited partners and children from visiting their sick spouse or parents even when they were dying. From the beginning, there were medical experts who scientifically argued the futility of the imposed measures and warned against the vaccinations. Doctors who protested were silenced on social media. Doctors who prescribed effective drugs were punished with heavy fines and revocation of their registration. The lockdown files show that the unvaccinated and critical doctors were right, that there was absolutely nothing right about the government policy. What also emerges from the lockdown files is the involvement of Bill Gates. Matt Hancock literally apps about Bill Gates. He owes me one. In other words, Bill Gates owed him one because Hancock had millions of his vaccines injected. This so-called philanthropists bought shares in Big Pharma for $50 million, and after the corona hype, they were sold for 500 million. The contracts with huge sums of money signed by governments with the pharmaceutical multinationals are still not public. The correspondence between Pfizer and the EU President Ursula von der Leyen is still secret. The messages between Dutch Minister Hugo de Jonge and Prime Minister Mark Rutte about corona have supposedly been erased. It looks like the European Commission and governments of EU member states were as aware of corona's low mortality as the British government. Their policies are almost identical. The flawed PCR test was accepted EU-wide. The digital corona certificate became an international travel document. And even the wording is almost identical. Several countries at the same time were talking about vaccinating from neighborhood to neighborhood, from house to house, from arm to arm. The measures lacked any reasonable ground, yet violated basic human rights, fundamental freedoms. Physical and mental integrity were violated without justification. There must be government accountability for this in every state. As a member of the European Parliament, I demand that the European Commission come to the Parliament to account for this. Therefore, I ask the President of the European Parliament to urgently put on the agenda for the next Strasbourg session a debate on the lockdown files with Ursula von der Leyen. We will see whether the European Parliament wants to take up its controlling task or whether it's complicit in the biggest scandal of the century.
Om de veiligheid van de vaccins te beoordelen was het voor de EMA essentieel dat bijwerkingen goed zouden worden geregistreerd. En de EMA zegt hierover: wij verwachten vele rapportages van bijwerkingen die optreden tijdens of kort na de vaccinatie. En dat betekent dat juist in de eerste periode vanaf vaccinatie de klachten moeten worden gemeld. De regering steunde een beleid waarin deze klachten de eerste 14 dagen na vaccinatie juist niet werden gemeld, omdat het vaccin 10 tot 14 dagen nodig zou hebben om effectief te worden. Alle klachten in die periode werden juist aan het coronavirus toegeschreven. En dat is niet alleen frauduleus, het is moedwillig in gevaar brengen van mensenlevens. En ik herinner u er nog maar eens aan dat we nog steeds kampen met een gigantisch, zogenaamd onverklaarde oversterfte. De regering wist dat de vaccins niet zouden beschermen tegen de verspreiding van het virus, maar deelde deze informatie niet met de burgers. Integendeel, het drong de vaccins aan onze burgers op met leugens, verdoezelde de bijwerkingen en bracht hiermee de gezondheid van iedereen die zo'n vaccin genomen heeft in gevaar. De vaccinatiecampagnes dienen zo snel mogelijk stopgezet te worden en het is gewoonweg niet veilig en ze voldoen niet aan de eisen die de EMA stelt. En de regering en alle politieke partijen die dit steunden behoren op hun leugens en bedrog afgerekend te worden.
Ak mal niekto iný názor na očkovanie proti covidu, bol nebezpečný pre spoločnosť. Média otvorene písali, veď si to pamätáte, ja teraz citujem, že každý nezaočkovaný by mal kvíriť od bolesti ako prasa. Ba treba aj použiť silu, ak niekto odmieta politiku ihly. A dnes sa ukazuje, že náš slobodný pohľad na očkovanie a opatrenia vlády v boji proti covidu, hrubo porušujúce ľudské práva, bol správny a opodstatnený. Jedna štúdia za druhou potvrdzujú škandalózne dôsledky masívneho očkovania nepreskúšanými experimentálnymi vakcínami. Áno, potvrdzujem, ako predseda strany a potvrdzujem to aj ako predseda vlády, že podporím úsilie niektorých politikov novej vládnej koalície politicky zhodnotiť, čo to tu vláda v rokoch 2020 až 2021 vystrájala a pozrieť sa aj na finančnú stránku plošných často úplne nezmyselných nákupov zdravotníckych pomôcok a vakcín. Rovnako veľmi jasne prehlasujem, že Smer Slovenská sociálna demokracia nebude podporovať posilnenie právomocí Svetovej zdravotníckej organizácie na úkor suverénnych štátov pri riadení boja proti pandémiám. Poviem to, že takýto nezmysel mohli vymyslieť len nenažraté farmaceutické firmy, ktoré začali vnímať odpor niektorých vlád proti povinnej vakcinácii. Podľa Ústavy Slovenskej republiky sa na platnosť takýchto medzinárodných dohôd v prospech Svetovej zdravotníckej organizácie vyžaduje súhlas Národnej rady Slovenskej republiky. A ja neverím, že suverénne slovenské politické strany takýto súhlas vyslovia. Smer a jeho poslanci určite nie.
Klaus Schwab's life by subscription, quote, is really serfdom. It's slavery. Billionaire globalist corporations will own everything. Homes, factories, farms, cars, furniture. And everyday citizens will rent what they need, if their social credit score allows. The plan of the Great Reset is that you will die with nothing. To pull off this evil plan, Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum will need to take more than just material possessions from Australians. Senators in this very chamber today who support the Great Reset threaten our privacy, freedom and dignity. Yes, they're in this Senate chamber. One nation vehemently opposes the Great Reset, the Digital Identity Bill, theft of agricultural land use, forcing farmers off their land, and all of the Great Reset. One nation has a comprehensive plan to bring our beautiful country back to sustainable prosperity. And in the months ahead, we will be rolling that plan out. Instead of Lib Lab pushing Klaus Schwab's Great Reset with the tagline, "You will own nothing and be happy," One Nation advocates the Great Resist. We stand for a world where individuals and communities have primacy over predatory globalist billionaires and their quizzling bureaucrats, politicians and mouthpiece media.
The bottom line here is the vaccine does not prevent infection, does not prevent transmission. So why would we make anybody take it? It is insane. These are self-inflicted wounds, whether we're talking about the military, within our health systems, any parts of our economy where we force people to take a vaccine that doesn't prevent infection or transmission. Again, it's an insane policy. The numbers I have, about 8,000 members of the military have been dismissed. About 17,000 are awaiting some termination on their religious exemption. So this is serious business. But I'm here, and again, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm going to speak on behalf of those that are reluctant to take it. They're not crazy. Again, we now know that it doesn't prevent transmission at all. It doesn't prevent infection. And the fact of the matter is there are safety signals that anybody who's looking at CDC and NIH and FDA data might have cause for concern about. Now, part of our problem here is that the FDA, the CDC, the NIH have not been honest. They have not been transparent.